This Simple History episode is brought to you by World of Warships. Gibbeting. Gruesome execution methods in history. The gibbet was an instrument used to perform public executions. Its usage can be traced back as early as classical antiquity. Gibbeting, also known as hanging in chains, is the method of leaving a body hanging after execution, such as from the gallows or even after the victim was drawn and quartered. However, sometimes the victim was placed in the gibbet alive and left to die. Gibbeting can be seen very early in history as it is referred to in the Old Testament of the Bible. The construction and style of the gibbet was different depending on the region and period, and usually made by a blacksmith, and were quite expensive. The gibbet itself was a type of gallows with an arm projected from the top, which was used to hang the bodies of criminals, either after an execution or as a form of execution. However, what made gibbeting so different from other forms of hanging was that the criminal was hung using chains and then left until their body had completely decomposed. The body was often left hanging until the victim's clothes had rotted off of their body. A cage was made of iron and often connected to the wooden arm so that the body was preserved for as long as possible. This was to extend the humiliation of the victims as the public viewed their bodies' deterioration and rot. Moreover, gibbets were often located by major roadsides and other prominent locations. Criminals were left hanging on posts around 20 to 30 feet high in order to be seen far and wide. They sometimes remained in place for decades. Gibbeting was most often used for traitors, murderers, highwaymen, pirates, and sheep stealers, and was used only on male criminals. It was intended to serve as a deterrent to others from committing similar offenses. A famous example of gibbeting was when John Hutchins was convicted and condemned to death for the murder of a Mr. John Sparks in 1684. Hutchins was a prominent solicitor in early modern London, while Sparks was just a waterman or a river worker. According to the account of his execution, Hutchins fell into lewdness and debauchery, becoming familiar with the company of prostitutes and alehouses. The murder of John Sparks occurred on a night he had been in the alehouse for many hours and had come outside to find several watermen tormenting the local prostitutes. Hutchins and Sparks fell into a dispute, and Hutchins, after drawing his sword, stabbed him through the torso in a violent and drunken rage. While Hutchins did not confess to the murder of John Sparks, he confessed that he was a debauched person. John Hutchins was convicted of murder, and because he would not confess to his crime, he was condemned to the shameful death of the gibbet. On December 17, 1684, John Hutchins was hanged by the neck until dead and left on the gibbet for less than an hour until his body was cut down and then buried in unhallowed ground due to his sinfulness. Pirates were sometimes executed by hanging on a gibbet erected close to the sea or a river. Their bodies would be left dangling until they had been submerged by the tides 3 times. In London, Execution Dock is located on the north bank of the River Thames in Wapping. After tidal immersion, particularly notorious criminals' bodies could be covered in tar and displayed in gibbet cages a little further downstream at either Cuckold's Point, now the location of Pageant's Crescent, or Blackwall Point, located at the tip of the Greenwich Peninsula. Such a fate befell Captain William Kidd in May 1701, whose corpse was left up for 3 years as a warning to other pirates of the possible consequences of their actions. While gibbeting was an infrequent method of public execution prior to the 18th century, it was in 1752 that the Murder Act, also known as the An Act for Better Preventing the Horrid Crime of Murder, was passed in Great Britain, making the practice more popular. Particularly, the Murder Act made post-mortem punishments such as gibbeting customary, as it was thought of as a form of collective retribution and vengeance against murderers. So rather than being buried, murderers were to be dissected or left hanging in chains. The Murder Act was passed in 1752 due to the actions of the Hawkhurst Gang. The Hawkhurst Gang were a group of smugglers who, during the 1740s, committed frequent violent crimes throughout southeast England. Their crimes included smuggling tea and alcohol, robbery, and brutal murders. One of the most notable crimes of the Hawkhurst Gang was the murder of Richard Hawkins, a farm laborer and someone they suspected of stealing their tea. Hawkins was tortured, punched, kicked, and whipped to death. Then his body was weighted down with rocks and submerged in a local lake where it lay undiscovered for 9 months. When members of the Hawkhurst Gang were finally caught, 75 of them were imprisoned or hanged for their crimes. and 14 of those were gibbeted due to the severity of their crimes. The last use of the gibbet in the United Kingdom occurred in 1832, almost 100 years after the Murder Act was passed, when 2 last gibbets were made for William Jobling in Jarrow and shortly after James Cook in Leicester. It was outlawed in the United Kingdom in 1834 due to the barbarity of the act. There are 16 remaining gibbets in England. One of them still holds the skull of its unlucky occupant. A big thank you to World of Warships for sponsoring this episode. World of Warships is free to play and referred to as the thinking man's action game because it's the perfect balance of action and strategy. You can command a massive naval fleet featuring some of history's most iconic war vessels. In this game, you can unlock new ships and dominate the oceans with 30 million players worldwide. Experience combat and weather effects that make engagements unique and change the tactics of battle. The game is being updated constantly, and soon to hit the seas are submarines. These invisible hunters will have unique new mechanics with the best concealment. Subs will be rolling out as a special game mode in late 2019, becoming fully integrated into normal gameplay in early 2020, which allows for a completely different form of fast-paced World of Warships gameplay. Use our exclusive code below and get a free USS Langley aircraft carrier, which allows for a completely different form of fast-paced World of Warships gameplay. Click the link below to play World of Warships and collect an exclusive bonus starter pack. New players can register with the code PLAYLANGLEY2019 to receive 300 doubloons, 1 million credits, the USS Langley aircraft carrier, 3 days premium time, and more.